You ever wonder why you work harder than your parents did, yet it feels like you're drowning in the same river with higher currents? You earn more, you save more, you budget, you swear you'll get control, and still the price of everything climbs like it's personal. Here's the painful truth you've been avoiding. Money isn't just failing you. The system built around money is designed to keep you usable, indebted, and predictable. Most people think they're trapped by their own personality. They blame laziness, lack of discipline, bad luck, or not being smart enough. They scroll, they watch motivational videos, they buy another course, and then they keep waking up with the same tight chest. But if you're honest, you know something else is happening. The rules keep changing, the finish line keeps moving, and the people who claim to be winning seem to win by owning the mechanism, not by grinding harder than you. Welcome back to the hidden self. This is where we stop lying gently. Today, we're going to pull the curtain off the monetary matrix, not in a boring spreadsheet way, in a human way, in a psychological way, because the real conspiracy isn't only banks and governments. The real conspiracy is the story you've been told about why you're struggling and why your choices always end up inside the same cage. You're going to hear uncomfortable things, how money can expand from nothing, how debt becomes a machine that must grow forever, how inflation is not a natural disaster but often a policy tool, and why that's not just economics, it's behavior control. It shapes love, identity, ambition, health, and shame. By the end, you'll understand something essential. The matrix doesn't need you to be stupid. It needs you to be normal. It needs you to comply. It needs you to confuse permission with freedom. Let's start with the oldest trap, the green pill. In that famous story, the character is offered two options: keep sleeping inside the comfortable illusion, or wake up and see the world as it really is. Most of us didn't choose the green pill. We were programmed into it. From childhood, you learn that money is the measure of your effort. Study hard, get a job, be loyal, save carefully, deposit into a bank, and everything will stabilize. You were told it like it was physics, like gravity, like a moral law. And sure, sometimes the system rewards you temporarily. You get a raise, you buy a car, you feel relief, and then the relief becomes another dependency. Meanwhile, technology grows faster than your paycheck. Productivity skyrockets. Machines get smarter. Software does in minutes what used to take weeks. Delivery becomes instant. Communication becomes global. And yet, the modern person feels more exhausted, more anxious, more behind. You see it every day, even if you don't want to name it. People in cities working long hours and still living with roommates, still using credit cards like lifeboats, still choosing between healthcare and rent, still treating financial stability as a fantasy that only belongs to older people. Here's the micro story most people recognize. Imagine two people. One is someone who grows crops in a rural area. They work from sunrise to night, seasons stacking like debt. They invest in equipment, they save a little, they try to buy land. Maybe they even manage to build something, a small greenhouse, a decent yield, a steady income. And then the land they want keeps rising because the market outside their village is fed by speculation. The price of land is not only determined by crops and work, it's determined by credit, by expectations, by the ability of investors to borrow cheaply and move faster than ordinary people. Now imagine the second person, someone less visible, more connected, who buys property with money that didn't originate from years of sweat. They sign papers, they make calls, they flip assets, they win by timing and leverage. They make profit through price movement, not through productivity. In a year, their gain can equal what the first person would need decades to earn. The first person doesn't necessarily do anything wrong. They're simply playing a different game with a different rule set. That's why the core question cannot be, why are you lazy? The real question is, what is money really, and what is it designed to do to your life? Because money in the modern world is not neutral. It's not a passive scoreboard. It's a mechanism, and mechanisms have intentions, even if nobody signs a contract saying we intend to control you. The hidden self doesn't want you to fear. It wants you to see. And when you see, the fear shifts into anger, then clarity, then action. So let's break the illusion. People assume money represents real assets, gold, silver, physical commodities, something stable behind the paper. But the modern system is mostly based on fiat currency, money that has value because people agree it has value and governments enforce that agreement. It's not backed by metal in the way your grandparents' stories imply. It's backed by power, by taxation, by law, by the willingness of the public to accept it as payment. In history, there was a time when money was constrained by gold. Theoretically, you could exchange currency for gold at the state. That constraint acted like a thermostat. It kept the printing from becoming unlimited. But then, in the early 1970s, that constraint was removed. The moment the link to gold ended, the thermostat became a knob someone could turn. And once the knob belongs to governments and central banks, the temptation becomes irresistible. Now here's the part that makes most people's minds reject the idea. If the government prints, that's the only problem. But that's surface level thinking. Government printing is like what you see above water. The real magic trick is inside the banking system and the way commercial banks create credit that expands the money supply without requiring a pile of gold somewhere in the basement. Let's make this painfully concrete. A person works hard and saves a large amount of money. They put it in a bank. Many people believe that the bank is protecting their money, holding it safely, and letting the bank lend out the same money they already have. But that belief is part of the green pill story. The bank doesn't need to keep all deposits. They keep a required fraction as reserves. The rest becomes eligible for lending. So person A deposits money. The bank holds only a small portion. Then the bank lends the remaining amount to person B. Person B now has funds in their account. They can buy something. They pay person C. Person C deposits that money into another bank or the same bank or whichever institution is convenient. Now a new fraction of that deposit is kept as reserve, while the rest is again lent out. This is the multiplier. This is the cascade. Look closely at the psychology. Person A believes they still have their full deposit because in the ledger they do. Person B believes they now have additional purchasing power because in the ledger they do. And across the system, the total money that can circulate can become far larger than the original amount that entered as a deposit. The most important line is this. Banks don't only move existing money, they create new credit money when they issue loans. The loan is not a transfer of pre-existing cash waiting in vaults. The loan is an agreement that creates a new balance in the system. Then the interest is charged on top of it. And now you hit the uncomfortable math nobody wants to discuss at dinner parties. The bank can create the principal, but the total interest required for all borrowers to repay is not created in the same way. The system has more debt obligations than money available to extinguish them, especially when considering that borrowers might default, when considering timing, and when considering how money flows back and forth. That means the repayment of interest must come from somewhere else, from additional borrowing, from asset sales, from income redistribution, from someone losing what someone else gains. When you see this clearly, you can stop blaming individual morality. You start blaming incentives. So the system forces outcomes. Option 1. Person B competes and steals repayment capacity from others. That looks like business failures, layoffs, foreclosures, bankruptcies, and restructuring. It's not personal cruelty. It's the legal form of arithmetic. Option 2. The economy keeps borrowing new debt to service old debt. This is why people experience the cycle of boom and crash. In a boom, credit expands and everyone feels like genius. In a downturn, credit constricts and the fragile parts of the system break. Then new rounds of policy often push more credit again, because the machine cannot easily stop without causing mass losses. Debt can't just sit there politely. It needs growth. Otherwise, the structure collapses under its own weight. That is why consumption is encouraged, lending is advertised, and growth is treated like a religion. If everyone suddenly becomes content, if people stop buying and stop borrowing, the revenue streams collapse, defaults rise, and institutions panic. So the matrix needs appetite. It needs a certain kind of human. Now you might say, okay, but who really benefits from all of this? Let's not romanticize. The people who benefit are not necessarily the most hardworking. It's the people who get early access to newly created credit, or the people who can buy assets before the full effects of monetary expansion show up in prices. When money expands, the first recipients see asset prices before the average worker feels the inflation in daily life. They can convert credit into real assets. Then later, when price levels rise, the rest of society is left chasing the same goods with devalued currency. This creates a specific kind of inequality. It's not only about wealth, it's about positioning in time. It's about information, connections, and leverage. The matrix is a time machine. It moves purchasing power to those who stand closest to the ignition switch. And yes, central banks can be part of this. People treat them like neutral state institutions. They sound official, they sound public. But look at history and institutional design, and you find a different story. The central bank's authority often originates from coalitions of financial power. Then they manage liquidity through tools like interest rate changes and quantitative easing. The pattern is almost always the same. They pump money when markets are fragile. They stimulate asset prices. They create the illusion of recovery. And then when conditions allow, they tighten. That tightening causes instability for those most exposed. And then, in downturns, asset prices can fall, making it easier for well-positioned investors to buy at a discount. It's a cycle that transfers wealth upward while keeping the language of policy neutral. Think about how it feels emotionally when the cycle repeats. It produces a specific psychological outcome: helplessness. People begin to believe their suffering is random. They think they are unlucky. They think they are personally inadequate. They don't see it as design. So they internalize shame instead of organizing resistance. But the hidden self refuses to accept that. Shame is the lubricant of compliance. Now let's zoom out from the banking mechanism to the global political mechanism, because money is not just finance. Money is geopolitics. Money is a weapon disguised as a tool. Why can one country run persistent trade deficits and still avoid total collapse in a way that smaller countries often cannot? Part of the answer involves something like the petrodollar system, the dominance of a major currency in oil pricing and energy trade. If energy is priced in a currency, then every nation that needs energy must accumulate that currency to transact. That creates demand. Demand for the currency sustains its value and gives the issuing country leverage to borrow in its own currency. It's a structural advantage that doesn't depend on being morally better. It depends on being at the center of trade settlement. So when the issuing country expands supply of its currency, the depreciation risk is partially absorbed across the global system. The tax is distributed, not with a gun, with price dynamics, with trade terms, with reserve accumulation, with the quiet conversion of other people's savings into your currency's liquidity. This is why you can feel like the world is being drained while nobody can point to a single villain. It's not one villain, it's one architecture. And once you understand architecture, you start noticing how it's implemented in developing countries. The easy money that arrives as loans at low interest sounds like a gift. And to be fair, early phases can improve infrastructure. Roads get built, ports get built, sometimes real capacity increases, but then the mechanism turns, because debt that finances assets also creates vulnerability. If a country becomes dependent on foreign capital, the currency, the banking system, and the political economy become sensitive to global interest rates and capital flows. When external conditions change, the credit tap turns off, or capital withdraws, or interest costs rise. Then what was built on debt becomes trapped under debt service. Asset bubbles inflate because money is cheap. Land becomes a speculative vehicle. Then when tightening occurs, bubbles pop, unemployment rises, social stress rises, and then international institutions often step in with rescue packages that require austerity, privatization of public assets, and opening markets for foreign acquisitions, so the country gets saved while losing control of its productive assets. That is how economic colonization can happen without formal occupation. It happens through contracts, it happens through conditions, it happens through the debt trap. You can see the pattern in different countries across different decades. People blame local corruption or local incompetence because it's easier than understanding global incentives. But incentives operate at both ends. Local elites may collaborate, yes, but the system still generates the structural pressure that makes certain policies profitable and others impossible. And then the psychological damage inside the country becomes enormous, because debt does something to the soul. It makes people risk-averse. It makes them fearful of losing employment. It makes them obey. It kills creative risk. If your survival depends on stable cash flow, and cash flow depends on paying loans, then you cannot experiment freely. You cannot take long-term risks. You cannot spend time on skills that take years to pay off. You choose what pays immediately. You choose what reduces uncertainty. You choose conformity. This is why in debt-based economies, short-term thinking becomes normal. Businesses cut R&D. Companies buy back shares to look good rather than invest in real innovation. Public relations becomes a substitute for product quality. Food gets adulterated because profit margins must increase to cover interest obligations. Training gets shortened. Hiring freezes become routine. A workforce becomes a cost that must be minimized, and the person watching from the outside experiences that as exhaustion and meaning collapse. They think they are tired because they work too much. Sometimes they truly do. But deeper, they are tired because they are trapped inside a moral treadmill. They are asked to trade their time and health for the right to keep paying. Then media and advertising intensify the trap by creating emotional hunger. You are not only economically pressured, you are emotionally manipulated. Ads whisper that you are not good enough yet, that you need something you don't have to become someone you should have already become, that you deserve relief now, so borrow to buy it now, that you can treat debt as a tool rather than a chain. In this way, consumerism is not merely spending, it's identity purchase. People buy cars and brands to signal status. They buy clothes to hide insecurity. They buy gadgets to feel competent. They buy experiences to outrun loneliness. And they do it using money they don't possess. They spend to impress people they don't even like. That's not a lifestyle choice. That's the consequence of shame management under financial pressure. Now, here's another psychological truth. When debt becomes chronic, people lose courage. Courage is the ability to tolerate uncertainty. Debt reduces tolerance for uncertainty. It makes uncertainty feel dangerous. And when uncertainty becomes becomes dangerous, creativity dies. People become cautious. People become compliant. People stop asking big questions because big questions might threaten income stability. So the system produces a certain kind of personality: polite, stressed, compliant, always hustling, never calm. And then the deepest effect shows up in relationships. When money becomes the universal converter, everything gets translated into transactions. Dating becomes negotiation. Friendship becomes networking. Family becomes obligation. Community becomes a marketplace. When someone is struggling, instead of receiving help from neighbors, they go to a bank and hope a loan will patch their pain. But loans don't heal, they postpone. Isolation becomes the hidden cost. People grow lonely inside their convenience. They have streaming services, automation, delivery, and efficient schedules, yet they feel disconnected. They can't tell whether it's loneliness or depression, so they self-medicate with entertainment and spending. In developed countries, mental health statistics show the outcome. More money printing doesn't buy happiness. It buys temporary satisfaction and short-term thrills. Then it buys more anxiety. Because the more money you can borrow, the more you can lose. And the more you can lose, the more your nervous system stays on alert. So you end up with this eerie modern slavery. Old slavery wore chains you could see. Modern slavery wears responsibilities in your mind. It hides behind monthly statements. It hides behind interest rates. It hides behind the thought, I can't quit, I can't risk it, I can't fall behind. The chain is not only financial, the chain is cognitive. Now at some point, if you're honest, you begin to ask whether the system is the problem or whether you are the problem. And the answer is not that you are worthless. The answer is that you were trained to consent without knowing. So the Matrix has one more trick. It offers you the illusion of control while keeping you inside the rules. For example, it tells you to invest responsibly in markets that are often inflated by credit cycles. It tells you to increase risk tolerance to earn returns. It tells you to believe that the market always goes up and that you can outsmart the cycle if you just watch more charts. Sometimes people do make money, especially during booms, but if you look at the system long enough, you realize that most people are not positioned to harvest wealth. They are positioned to absorb losses. Because markets inflate, then crash, and after crashes, the people with liquidity buy while others are forced to sell. The tragedy is that many individuals think their losses are personal failure rather than systemic timing risk. They blame themselves and then re-enter the same structure, hoping their next move will finally break the pattern. That hope is not strategy. It's addiction to the illusion of fairness. Now let's talk about the moral layer, because debt-based systems distort values. When financial returns from speculation are higher than returns from production, elites stop caring about building real things. It becomes irrational to invest in slow, hard work when fast leverage produces quicker profits. You can build factories and train workers, but if the return is lower than flipping assets, you invest in flips. The economy tilts away from craftsmanship and toward financial gains, and that shift contaminates culture. Young people lose motivation because the reward they see is not linked to honest effort. They see someone get rich by moving money around, by exploiting credit, by riding bubbles. They feel that education and mastery won't catch up to housing prices inflated by speculation, so their mindset becomes smaller. Their ambition becomes defensive rather than expansive. Then the society begins to eat itself. People overconsume. People underinvest in human capital. People cut corners to survive quarterly pressure. The quality of products and food declines. The patience required for long-term innovation vanishes. People become numb, not because they are evil, but because their environment trains them. And morality gets bent. When money becomes unreal, ethics becomes optional. If you can profit from deception while others are forced into desperation, then you learn that honesty is a risk and deceit is a tool. That's not only an economic outcome, it's a psychological poisoning. So what do you do when you realize all of this? You can't personally overthrow the financial system. One person cannot dismantle central bank policy. One person cannot control global currency arrangements. One person cannot delete the architecture. Trying to fight it directly can also become another form of delusion, because it turns your attention into frustration instead of freedom. But you can build survival boats. You can build channels to reduce dependence. You can design your life to resist the matrix's leverage points. The goal is not purity. The goal is autonomy. So here are the exits, and they start inside your mind, because the matrix starts inside your mind too. First, detox your relationship with easy money. Understand that there is no free lunch. A loan is not kindness. A loan is future pressure. And debt changes your personality faster than you think. It shrinks your options. It makes you accept bad jobs. It makes you delay leaving unhealthy relationships. It makes you avoid starting a business because you can't afford risk. You might hear people say, I'm using credit wisely. But think about what wise means in a debt system. Wise usually means you can repay without panic.